you have to be delighted, and in fact you are delighted. But it very much it really is really acknowledgement of not so much me, but the fact that Western Sydney arts and particularly performing arts, is actually developed considerably over a period of time, to the point where I guess someone is awarded an AM. And that only happens because of a lot of people who've contributed over a long period of time. Many people have contributed even before I even turned up in Parramatta. So it's really acknowledgement of a very long-term investment from individual artists, but also an interest of audiences and patrons as well. Well, it opened in 1988. I wasn't at the opening. I'd headed off to South Australia at the time, but I remember coming out before it opened, and I remember actually the building process, because I was working at the Seymour Centre at the time, looking after the new Nimrod as well. And I remember Evan Williams, who ran Arts New South Wales at the time, was very involved in actually getting this building set up. And also Les Curry, who was the first director of the theatres, I knew quite well, and I've worked with since actually at Fox Studios. So I knew quite a lot about what was happening here. I think that I didn't see all the inaugural productions, but there were some very successful inaugural productions. Grant Dobwell was involved in one of the very early productions here, and he's been a long-time supporter of the theatres here. And of course, his production of Codgers actually, I guess I'd describe as a highlight too, which came many, many years later, although that's probably about 7 years ago now too. But the first show that I might have seen may have been a Festival of Sydney show or presentation of Brand New Day, the stage production, which was part of the Festival of Sydney, and it had Ernie Dingo in it, although I had actually seen it in South Australia, because I was sort of been in South Australia prior to 1992 and had seen it with a different cast. But I remember seeing it here, and I remember how audiences reacted to it so well. So I came about 13 years after the building had opened, and the building had a mixed success and also a mixed program up to that point, but it certainly wasn't a burgeoning program. And so when I came here, one of my jobs was to try and actually build the theatres program to the point that if you actually rang up, and in those days you probably did ring up, because we didn't have a website and we didn't have the internet, believe it or not, in 2000, there'd be something on. So you knew there'd be something here, whereas once upon a time there might be something which was fantastic, which you might have to wait another 3 weeks until there was another program. So the continuity factor was very important, and we started to build a range of programs. I remember that when I saw the Sydney Festival show here in 1992 or 1993, whichever, I may have seen some in both years, the festival then stopped coming to Parramatta, and it was really when I arrived that I started having discussions with Brett Shee, who was then the director, in 2000, and in 2001 the festival came back, and the festival's been here ever since then. So I guess one of the highlights every year is actually having the Festival of Sydney here, and they've had an amazing program of activity over that period of time of wonderful shows. In amongst that, we established the Big Laugh Comedy Festival, which I guess was another highlight. We ran that for about 7 years. And when we started that, comedy in Sydney didn't really exist much. There might have been the odd comedy club, but there wasn't a lot of activity. So what we did was to create a festival, and at its height, it not only ran here, but it also ran at the Seymour Centre. So we actually had a 3-week period where the festival actually occurred here, but also we had if you like, an outpost of it in the east. That's were the very entrepreneurial period. And of course we had some highlights in those festivals of things like the Goodies, which we brought from the UK, and Auntie Jack, which we also hadn't really done a live show for maybe 20 plus years or more. And so both those sort of things were things that we got involved and initiated and had happen. And of course, throughout all that period, we've been running a theatre program every year. And look, there are countless shows. It's very hard to really say which ones, but the ones I'd probably focus on are the ones that we've produced ourselves or have been involved in a co-production. So things like Codgers was one of them, but we've also done Rainbow's End, which was a play by Jane Harrison, who wrote also Stolen, which we also have done a production of. But Rainbow's End had Christine Arnoux in it, and a very young actress at the time, and I think one of her first professional roles, Shanoa Demal, I think is how you pronounce her second name. And she was just here recently in The 7 Stages of Grieving, which was on a couple of weeks ago. So what other programs have we... Well, we've done a lot of... I could go on forever, but there's some of the highlights, and I won't. But certainly our theatre program, ongoing theatre program, is a highlight, and there's always fantastic shows in that. And of course, probably one of the most significant highlights is the establishment of the National Theatre of Parramatta, which we started about 15 months ago now. It seems like a lifetime, but it's relatively a young creation. And of course, we started that with a production of Swallow, and then we did Stolen, and then we did The Cartographer's Curse, then we did Who Speaks for Me, and then we did Hakawati during the last festival. We did Smurf in Wonderland earlier this year, and at the moment an adaptation of a novel by a local writer, Felicity Castagna, is currently in rehearsal and will open in early July. Which is called The Incredible Here and Now, which is sort of really interesting that we're actually doing a play called that, because that's sort of what Parramatta is now, the incredible here and now. Well, the good thing is we don't have to do some of that adaptation in a way, because the sorts of things that we're able to present are really writers and creative artists who was responding to the times. So they want to tell stories that are, have got some contemporary relevance and will resonate with audiences. We're always concerned that the things that we present or we produce will resonate with Western Sydney audiences, but the reality is they probably need to also resonate with any audiences, because we're telling human stories. All of our plays certainly are telling human stories. And of course we also do a lot of music as well. So, and how's our music changed? Well, as you know, music's fairly fashionable, and so we try to present the best of what you might call heritage music, but we also try to present a lot of new contemporary music. And dance, of course, we have Form Dance, which is based here as well, and of course they're a contemporary dance group, and so they're really committed to actually trying to do dance which is contemporary, and I guess to use that, our play title, incredible, and definitely of the here, and definitely of the now. Well, we've been mulling and dreaming for quite some time about a new Riverside, a new Riverside which can build on, if you like, the legacy of this building, but also the program that's been presented in this building, but which actually focuses more on being a real place where the community can meet, can reflect on who they are, who they would like to be. A place where you can, as I always like to say, you can come down and with your family at 8 o'clock in the morning and have breakfast here. There might be a free activity for your kids. There might be a reading or a storytelling exercise happening somewhere. Maybe there's an exhibition you can have a look at as well. And maybe there's an afternoon performance or a concert that you can go and see. And that some of the activity that's internal is complemented by activity which is external. So that a new building would actually better articulate with the public domain and open ourselves up and become something that when you walk down Church Street, you can sort of see, if you like, a sea of people inside actually participating in what Riverside would be in the future. So we certainly have plans for a new art centre. I call it an art centre with performance at its core, because I think the idea that it would just be a performing arts centre is not really keeping pace with the changes that are going on in our world. We need to be a place which has other things that are possible and that can contextualise the performances that we're actually presenting, and also that respond to new technology as well. I mean, we should be at a point where we're beginning to live stream some of our performances so people can actually see them. Or we've got a wall cast of a concert so people can sit in deck chairs and watch a live concert happening in one of the theatres, which would actually be, filmed and screened, or literally live projected onto a wall that people could actually watch. So we've got to think about ways that we can actually get people introduced and involved with what we do, but without it becoming so intimidating, or in the case of what we have now, where we've got brick walls all around us that you can't even see what happens in here. So for many people who probably have walked up and down Church Street many times in their life, but have never turned left or right to walk down our loggia and to walk into our entrance, which is a little bit hidden down the side of the building, would never know what was happening here. And you often see people who come here for the first time, they sort of come in, you can sort of see them going, oh, didn't know this was here. Oh, it's quite interesting. And then they actually go and see something and come out with even more a sense of, oh, that was a surprise that we weren't quite expecting, but isn't it great that we've actually found it now? So we've got to find ways to actually invite people in, make people feel welcome, and actually give them an experience which says we want to have more of this. Do you know, it probably was never a cultural background, because every city and every community has its culture, if you're looking at it in terms of culture. I mean, arts activity is part of that culture. But when I look at this building, I always look at it and love the idea that this used to be the council depot, this very site, and that the baths were here. You know, that this was a place where the community came to swim, but more importantly, they came to actually meet each other, socialise, interact, tell stories probably, talk to each other. So there's always, Parramatta has always had its culture, it's always had its ways that people actually interact and actually reflect on what it means to be a human being in the world. In terms of its arts activities, they were probably more less professional. They were more probably rooted in community activity. There were still probably people singing around pianos. There were still people probably telling stories, you know, around the campfire or around the barbecue. I mean, you know, think of the number of stories that get told around barbecues. And that's probably part of the secret of where we go in the future. We actually really do need to connect to our communities and start to think about how can we make your culture something which can actually have a platform and a place where you can celebrate your culture, and you can actually let other people participate in what your culture is about. One of the views I have is that let's have some more, because we're growing. It's partially to do with our program, but it's also partially to do with there's just more people. And so our audiences are actually increasing quite rapidly. It's one of the reasons why we need a new building, because the demand factor is now getting to a point where we really haven't got a lot of spare slots in our 3 modest theatres, really. And that there's a great desire for people to actually, both at a professional level but also at a community level, to actually express themselves, to say something. And the spaces that we provide, you know, provide spaces where those stories can be told in a communal setting and where people can share those stories. So growth is actually building demand, and we need to respond to that. I walked past an ex-councillor the other day, and he sort of said, how's it going down there? Is it big enough? And I think he was probably asking a question, do you really need a new theatre? And look, we can probably make do for a few more years, but in 10 years, you know, unless we have more spaces, or unless this space is changed and adapted, we really won't be able to meet the demand, both in terms of audience demand, but also in terms of people using the theatres to actually tell their stories, or have their event, or have their celebration, have their concert, have their school activity, you know, have their you know, their group, their cultural group, actually, you know, doing something here. So in 10 years' time, yes, I think we're absolutely going to need new facilities. Well, the council's been developing a new cultural plan, which is actually on exhibition. We're on exhibition, I think, yesterday, or maybe the night before, which I encourage everybody to go onto the council website and have a look, because council wants a response to that. And within that, you will see, you know, one of the plans is to, you know, redevelop Riverside and actually create a new anchor arts centre with performance at its core. And so that definitely is a plan. and not just an aspiration. I think it's an intention to do something about that. It may take another 5 years or so, but it is going to happen, and that's really a result of the rapid growth in Western Sydney, but particularly in Parramatta. Well, I mean, the one thing we do is it actually, venues like this allow an opportunity for people to congregate, to come together. Technology does that too, but as we know, we're sitting here and we're real, although what we're actually doing is producing something that won't be real, it'll be virtual in a sense. But our conversation now is very different if you were interviewing me over Skype or over... And it's exactly the same with an audience. I mean, it's why people still go to the cinema. I mean, they don't have to. They can stay at home on their own and they can sort of stream something from Stan or from Netflix. But people still go to the cinema because there's something quite unique in sitting with a body of people all responding and somehow connecting, sometimes quite mysteriously, in the way you actually see what's going on the screen. So that, in a sense, is a live activity in terms of the audience. Obviously, what's on the screen isn't live, but then when you add in the actual element of live performance, there's nothing better than the opportunity to be in a situation where that actor or that performer-audience relationship is happening, again, here and now, and probably incredibly in a way that you can never quite replicate on digitally. Although, we now have a screen, which is probably one of the other highlights, of the last 5 years. We know we now run a fairly a growing, burgeoning screen program, which has a lot of recorded live performance, as well as a lot of art house cinema and documentaries and all sorts of things. But there is something unique about live performance, which is a little bit more dangerous as well. You never really quite know what the performance will be on that night. Like the actors or the performers come to it with a particular mindset of that moment, and an audience comes. If it's been raining and you're late and you couldn't find parking, you arrive with one sort of way to see the performance. If it's your anniversary, and you've been, and whatever the anniversary is celebrating, and you come with a group of people and you're in celebratory mood, you'll actually see what happens on stage differently. And then that interaction, which happens literally as a performance actually is actually being played out, that relationship is changing. So you can go and see a performance one night and you go and see the same performance the next night. It won't be the same. There'll be things that will be different. And I think that's what intrigues people is that particularity of a particular moment in time, but also the possibility that it won't all go right. And of course, we know when it doesn't go right, audiences are incredibly responsive to that. They sort of get in behind it, they almost become like the cheer squad and say, keep going, we're with you. So if a performer isn't available and someone comes out to make an announcement and says, our performer isn't very well, we just want to let you know that, but they're going to go ahead with the performance, you know that the audience are going to be 150% on side. And then even when, say, the star performer can't actually be there and the understudy goes on, the audience actually gets in behind the understudy and wills them to give a great performance. And in fact, actors will tell you can actually feel that audience sort of like that audience sentiment actually coming through to you as a performer. So that's why live performance will never stop. Like, they used to say it was going to die. Has it died? No, it hasn't. We've still got wonderful live performance. In fact, a plethora of it. Like Sydney's never been so blessed, like you can go out probably 100 times a night to 100 different events, which are all live performance somewhere in Sydney. And in terms of percentage terms, a growing number are actually now happening here in Parramatta and Western Sydney. So that's the future. That we're going to see a lot more live performance in Parramatta and Western Sydney, but we'll also see a lot more digital performance as well. And we're going to see the intersection of those two. As I said, we will do stream performances. We will use technology to be able to introduce people to what we do and to be able to invite them in. So technology is going to play a part. And indeed, who knows? We may have hologrammatic or literally virtual performances, because the technology will allow that to happen. So there will be not real people in front of you. There'll be some technological sort of projection of those events happening. And it'll all get mixed up. There's a lot of disruption going on, and indeed the performing arts has been disrupted as much as anything else. And the clever organisations, and I think the City of Parramatta is a clever, council is a clever organisation. I think we're reasonably clever. It's just trying to think at least sort of 10 steps ahead, and in terms of years, at least 5 years ahead in your head about what it's going to be, and keep trying to position yourself. Arrange yourself organisationally and creatively and artistically, constantly being prepared to adapt and change and move on the basis that what you are now cannot be what you will be in 5 years' time, because you won't be here if you do that. You've got to be very responsive to what's going on in the world. Well, it means our program has to be. It's very diverse now, but it needs to become more diverse. It needs to become more diverse, not just in terms of art form or in terms of the sorts of people who are actually doing the performance. It also needs to become more time responsive. We need to be doing things that workers, when they finish work, can actually come to, but they don't feel as though they have to spend the whole evening at. As I said, we need to be doing things that can happen in the morning. So families that are up early with young kids, might want to hit the road a bit earlier than maybe teenagers or people a little bit older who may not want to. So we need to basically, if we work pretty hard now, we need to work even harder. These sort of spaces should be almost like 24 hours. We should be like the 24-hour convenience store. We should be the 24-hour art centre. You should be able to come here any time during 24 hours, and there'll be something for you to do here. And hopefully there'll be still a few people around. It won't be entirely technology based. Well, thank you very much, and I have to thank the City of Parramatta Council, because I'm fortunate that they actually provide the wherewithal which allows me to actually program this place. You can't do anything without that financial investment, and the City of Parramatta and its predecessor, Parramatta City Council, have put up a lot of money over that period of time to actually build what Riverside is today. And also what it will be in the future.